All right, so the session's now being recorded. Today's session is entitled The Virtual Practice. Technology has enabled a whole raft of changes in our industry. It's enabled us to pretty much operate without any physical premises at all. We can pretty much work from anywhere using technology. We can work from the cafe, we can work from the library, we can work, if we wanted to, from the beach in Fiji. Technology is expanding our geographic boundaries. So we can, if we want to, we can serve clients around the world. We're not limited to our geographic location from which to service and provide advice to clients. We can outsource pretty much everything as well. So our administration functions of the practice can be outsourced. Our technology is outsourced. The virtual practice is a reality today. Today's webinar is a little different to ones we've run in the past. Typically what we have is a particular theme and we have a single presenter talking through that particular theme. Today, we are privileged to have with us, in addition to Barry, who is our resident best practice and compliance expert, who will be commenting on some of the discussions this morning. We have the leaders of two organizations who are making significant inroads into enabling the virtual practice for the advice space in New Zealand. We're going to be talking to the CEO of Sweetbox, which is an online meeting tool which is pretty much unique, as far as I can ascertain, pretty much unique around the world. I have just recently started using it, and it's actually revolutionized some of the way I conduct meetings. It has some pretty unique features which are designed very much in line with the needs of the professional advisor. So whether that's a financial advisor, or an accountant, or a lawyer, the Sweetbox solution has some unique features which enable advice to be delivered or meetings to be held with between two parties who could be at opposite ends of the world. Ian Dunbar is the CEO of Sweetbox, and he'll be joining us in a second to talk about some of the things that he's seeing in the virtual space, the virtual practice space. After that, we then have Stephen Martin. I know a number of you may well know of Stephen, but Stephen has relatively recently launched an initiative called Virtual Staff, and it's revolutionizing some of the advisory practices in New Zealand. It is allowing a lot of the work that typically would be done either by the advisor or a local administrator to be outsourced to somebody elsewhere in the world. And Stephen is pretty much leading the way for advisors, I think, in New Zealand for the virtual assistant model. So Stephen will also be joining us after the interview with Ian to talk about what he's seeing from a virtual practice point of view. How some of the advisors that are using his services are in fact using those services, and some of the challenges and opportunities that the virtual assistant model provides for the advice practice. Now, at the end, so those two sessions we expect to probably run for about 35 to 40 minutes. Barry will then provide us with some insights into some of the things that you need to be thinking about if you do go down the virtual practice model. So it will be looking at some of the compliance issues, some of the risks that you face, some of the opportunities that you face, and how to handle those. So Barry will finish the session probably somewhere around 10:15, 10:30, just talking about some of those elements. Once again, as I say, if you've got any questions, please feel free to put them through the chat box or the questions box. And I will now like to introduce Ian Dunbar. Just unmute Ian so he can chat with us. Ian, good morning.
Hey, how are you this morning?
Good, thank you. Thank you for taking the time to join us and share with us your insights into the world of the virtual practice.
No problem at all, David.
Right. So, hopefully you can see a picture of Ian on the screen. Let's start with a little bit of insight into Sweetbox. So perhaps you can give us some insights into where Sweetbox has come from concept to where it is today. Because as I say, I've been using it recently, and it has pretty much revolutionized the way I conduct meetings online. Typically, in the past, I've used a webinar or a GoToMeeting type service, but Sweetbox is different, and I think it offers some unique features that make the concept of virtual meetings are very much a reality for today's advisor.
Yeah, no, hey, no problem, David, and hello to everyone. Look, yeah, absolutely. It's actually a really great story. So the founder of Sweetbox, Craig Meek, has spent a lot of his life working around video and virtualization and the use of technology and how you mesh technology and video streaming together to create great consumer outcomes. And Craig, for example, was one of the originators of the virtual spectator technology that's used around the America's Cup scene. But a number of years ago, Craig actually really was motivated by the fact that he has his advisor and has had his advisor for a number of years, and the relationship is already established and developed, and they've got that level of trust and they've got that level of human contact. So often when Craig was going to meet his advisor, particularly these days with Auckland's traffic, I'm based in Sydney, and I can assure you that I think Auckland's traffic is now officially worse. Craig actually said, how do I utilize the technology that I've been working with over a number of years and put it into a solution that actually enables you to run a meeting and do all of the sorts of things that you would do in a physical meeting, sitting across a table from each other, and you put that into an online or virtual space. So what does that really mean? So yes, it means that you're in a video meeting, but importantly, it means that you need to be able to bring a document into a meeting. You need to be able to collaborate on it and fill it out, just as you would if you were sitting together in a physical meeting. You might need to collaborate on some modeling technology, risk calculators or forecasting tools. But ultimately, you're also looking to actually complete that activity or that transaction. And usually, we complete activities and transactions by signing off. So very uniquely, what Sweetbox has delivered is the ability to do all of those things above, but also actually electronically sign off a document and have that delivered to the client, delivered to the host, and stored back, for the use of both parties. And by pulling all of that together, it means that you can actually do all of the things that you would normally do sitting across the face of each other, across the table from each other, but you're able to do it in that virtual space. So, David, as you said earlier, I mean, one of you could be sitting on the beach in Fiji and the other person's in Invercargill, and it wouldn't matter at all.
Exactly, yeah. There's a couple of features which I think make Sweetbox. You've talked about the digital signature, and that is a very unique feature of the tool. And in fact, I've watched Sweetbox evolve over the last 2 or 3 years. I think Craig and I touched base probably, it would be 2 years ago, probably, when Sweetbox was relatively in its infancy, and even at that stage, the concept was leading edge, and the idea of being able to share documents and sign documents and have them basically validated through online recording was as I say, it's pretty unique. The other thing is that it doesn't need a plugin, which I was pretty impressed with. So if most of you who are on today, I suspect you would have had to download a little plugin to get onto the webinar. Sweetbox doesn't require that. You can basically run a meeting and you can just do it straight from your browser, which is, again, I think that's relatively unique as well, isn't it?
It is, yeah. I think you're absolutely right, David. So you've touched on two really key points there. Is that one is that within Sweetbox, you can record parts of meetings. You could record the whole meeting if you wanted to, but really importantly, if you're signing off a document, by default, Sweetbox will initiate a recording of that part of the meeting. And you know, if you think about that from a compliance perspective and you know, an evidentiary perspective, it's very, very important. You know, electronic signatures, for example, are becoming much more common. But you know, there's a concept around, you know, how do you substantiate that electronic signature really is the person that, you know, you're expecting to have the document signed by. And your second point is, again, you know, when you're developing technology for the use of consumers, it's crucial that the technology is really easy to use. So that means, you know, being able to deliver an invite out to the participant in the meeting, then not have to have joined a service, like, you know, you don't have to have a Skype account or you don't have to have downloaded GoToMeeting technology. They just need to be able to click the link. And, you know, then we support a multiple range of browsers as well as, you know, Android devices, iPad, etc. And it has to be super simple. I personally am not that great at all of the desktop software, so, you know, I get tricked up even, you know, using some of this technology. So if it's going to be delivered out to clients, it has to be very, very easy to use. And that's a really important part of our design principles.
Yeah, yeah. Just for the audience, at the end of the webinar, there is a you'll get an email with a link to Sweetbox, the Sweetbox site, as well as the virtual staff site of Stephen. So you'll be able to visit Sweetbox and learn a little bit more at the end of the session. You also mentioned Craig. Craig actually is on the line as well. He's just listening in rather than participating, but he'll be there if we have any technical questions that might need to be answered. Thank you, Ian. Next question. We often hear the term virtual practice bandied around. What, in your opinion, would you say are the key features of the virtual practice?
Yeah, look, great question. For me, fundamentally, what underpins the concept of the virtual practice, and, you know, it could be, you know, in any type of business being performed virtually, is the utilization of technology that eliminates or largely mitigates the challenge of distance. So, you know, so much of what we do in our everyday lives is, there's a premise underlying it that we actually are in some shape or form going to meet in person. There's a premise that we're going to receive some sort of document or some sort of content, we're going to print it. There's all this sort of physical aspect to our lives. And obviously that's changed, you know, hugely over the last decade or two with, you know, mobile technology, etc. But, you know, I think in my own life, how often I get sent documents and, you know, the request is fill it out, print it, sign it, send it back. Currently, I have a broken printer at home, so it's actually really hard for me to print a document. So for me, the virtual practice is all about eliminating the requirement for that physical touch and that physical activity. So that's about being able to meet and service clients, you know, in different geographies. It's also about eliminating that need for printing and paper, you know, physical signing, physical filling out of documents. It's all of those things that inject inefficiency and process delay and hassle and inconvenience into the way that we do business. Which is not in any shape or form to say that I think that, you know, meeting people in person and developing those personal relationships is not vital. But the virtual practice is all about delivering the ability for those inefficiencies in business processes to be taken out and service clients, using digital and geographically remote means.
Yeah, it's an interesting challenge. At NZFAA, our board structure changed at the end of last year. So we had a new chairman and we had a new treasurer. And one of the challenges we faced was to replace the signatories on our bank account. It has taken literally 4 months for us to effect that change, and the predominant reason for that has been because of the fact that the bank has sent us through forms that we've had to print off, fill in, sign, and then those forms have had to go to the various parties for their own, physically go to those parties for their own signatures, and then they've had to then send it back to me because we've got a geographically disparate board. And then the bank said, no, we give you the wrong paperwork, sorry, and we've gone through that process 3 times. And you'd think in this day and age that banks would be able to do that electronically, and yet it's been an absolute nightmare because it's all been physical. So I think you're right. Virtual practice it effectively allows us to revolutionize some of the stuff that we've done typically in a physical form. Yeah.
David, I've got an example of a client in Australia, and in Australia we have these great things now called opt-in forms. So I think it's every 2 years, an advisor has to get the client to sign off that they are continuing to permit the advisor charging fees to the client.
Yeah.
So, and if you don't get that document signed, then you have to actually by the due date, you actually have to completely terminate the relationship with the client. I have got a client, an advisor client of Sweetbox in Melbourne, who lost the business of an important client who was a doctor, who for 6 weeks just couldn't print, sign and scan the opt-in form, couldn't come into the office. And literally on the day of that expiry, they had to terminate all that relationship with that client. Now, I believe ultimately that client re-onboarded, but you actually are going right back to zero and having to fully re-onboard the client.
That's great, isn't it?
And that's the sort of inefficiency that, at Sweetbox we're looking to eliminate, because if that doctor has just 5 minutes in his break at the hospital and can jump on his laptop or his iPad or whatever it might be, get that document signed, done, you've both got a copy of it, and then you move on.
Yeah, exactly. We're talking about signing, leads us on effectively to our next question. I know you guys have done an awful lot of work in understanding the legality behind digital signatures, and there's a lot of material on your blog, on your website, about what's a valid electronic signature or digital signature. Perhaps you can give us some insights into what the key principles are and how legislation plays a part in the legitimacy of digital signatures.
Yeah, look, no problem. So, and looking at it is actually quite a complicated topic globally. Luckily in New Zealand, and to a slightly lesser extent in Australia, the law is actually very permissive around electronic signatures. So in New Zealand, it's governed by the Electronic Transactions Act, which I think is 2002. And what the Electronic Transactions Act does is it creates a framework that says that electronic signatures have the same status as handwritten signatures, as long as both parties agree to the use of electronic signatures. So, as long as you're both consciously permitting that you're signing electronically, then the electronic signature has the same meaning in law. There are, in both countries, the odd exception, but by and large, for all of the types of business that is being undertaken, by advisors of all types, electronic signatures are valid. David, you raised a question before around, the bank requiring the ink signature or the handwritten signature. And I guess what we see, across various jurisdictions is that the policies of financial product providers, banks, insurance companies, etc., are kind of catching up in time with what the law permits. But there's also a concept which is quite important, which is around how do you actually substantiate that electronic signature? What's the, it's effectively recommended best practice around retention and audit trail, etc. And different technologies deal with that in different ways. But Sweetbox, we take the approach which is really robust, which is by having a video record of the signing of the meeting in which the document is being signed. That gives you some very, very strong evidence for the future if there's dispute about whether or not that agreement was, or that document was actually signed between the two parties. Mm-hmm. But globally, and I think this is where we're going to see, quite a lot of direction is. I was in Europe recently, and interestingly, both Switzerland and Germany have taken this to a much more developed level, in the sense that they have also amended their laws to explicitly acknowledge that identity verifications can be done through video means. So it's not just signing; it's actually moving down the path of how you actually undertake, your anti-money laundering and know your client obligation.
That was a very interesting comment, because it was when I've talked to advisors about Sweetbox. One of the questions was, how do we, if we are setting up let's say setting up an investment program for a client, maybe it's a KiwiSaver, how do we evidence the ID? Because they're expected to actually physically see the driver's license or the passport or whatever the means of identification is.
Yeah.
So it's interesting that is where Europe is headed. Because I suspect we'll be headed in the same direction.
Europe is absolutely already there with Switzerland and Germany taking the lead. And it's a conversation at Sweetbox that we're initiating with some of the identity management providers, such as Green ID, around how we might mesh some of this capability together. But if you think about the application of the technology, and again, some of the policies and procedures will need to catch up with this. But you're in a video meeting with a client. The client has their driver's license, they have their passport. We can hold that up to the camera and we can have a video record of all of that content. And that video content can be kept, in a completely secure, untouchable form. So, yeah, watch this space. It's a very, very exciting area for future development.
Yeah, I think it's going to be interesting, and it's an area it's something I've been watching for quite some time. Now, I'm very conscious of time, and I'm wondering whether we might have to skip through some of these questions, because I need to finish up very shortly. I will just want to ask one final question before we move over to Stephen. What does the advice practice of 2026 look like in your view?
Oh, that's a great question, David. Look, I think that notwithstanding a lot of the press that we increasingly read these days, I don't believe that the advice practice of 2026 is going to be completely manned by robots. But what we are going to see is a much, much, much greater use of technology inside the advice practice. And what I mean by that is so many of the activities that occur today around data capture, fact finds, risk profiling, investment allocation, etc., will all be being run very efficiently through technology. And that's going to mean huge productivity gains for advice practices. And it's also going to mean that advisors are going to be filling this incredibly important role of coach, of confidant, You know, it's going to strip so much of the manual process and inefficiency out of an advice practice, and actually leave, in my view, advisors to be doing the things that advisors are very, very good about, which is actually, you know, coaching, reinsurance, guidance, etc. You know, and that'll be being done still in offices, but we're obviously also going to see a huge proportion of that activity done through you know, virtual means.
Yeah, I think you're right. And I think that's one of the things that technology does do. It allows you to step up in terms of the value that you add. So rather than, it allows you to take away some of the mundane activities which can be automated. And as you say,
That's
you
right.
become a much more of a coach, and you're doing much more high level activities that typically technology can't handle. Ian, I really appreciate your time this morning. If you could perhaps just stay online for the next hour, that would be great.
Absolutely. Thanks,
Uh,
David. I really appreciate the opportunity.
and so, and for those of you that are interested in Sweetbox, as I say, there will be a link in the follow-up email. I would encourage you to take a look. If you ever want to be able to conduct an online meeting with a client, it is a very simple tool. So after the session, of course, but do check it out. It's well worth a look, and I've used it to very good effect over the last week or two. Thank you, Ian. I will just mute you. And we'll bring on Stephen. Stephen, can you hear me?
I can indeed, David. How are you going?
Very good, thank you. Again, thank you, Stephen, for joining us this morning to share with us some of your insights on the virtual practice, and in particular from the perspective of the VA, the virtual assistant, and through your initiative, Virtual Staff.
No problems at all.
Okay, so let's a similar question to the one we started with Ian. Now, you obviously run Virtual Staff, and it's something that was it last year or the year before you founded Virtual Staff?
It's been about 18 months now, David. So
Right.
we, I guess, giving you a bit of an overview, we saw a bit of a gap in the market across a variety of businesses in New Zealand from running our own digital marketing practice. We were using virtual assistants ourselves, and we started having a lot of advisors and business coaches contacting us to see if we could help them hire their own assistants, because they could see the value in spending more of their time doing the profitable activities and not the things that they were pulling out their hair with. And what we kind of realized is at that time we had 4 or 5 people we helped out, and every time we helped someone, there was another referral or a testimonial coming from that interaction. And you know, in business, when you start getting that happening, you realize there's something here. And we started from that point and founded Virtual Staff off the back of that concept. And I've been working a lot with advisors over the process, because I was an advisor in another lifetime, so I kind of understand some of the challenges they were going through.
Yeah, I know there's a couple of NZFAA members that are using your service, and in fact, NZFAA have just recently engaged a VA through your company.
Fantastic.
In fact, she starts on Monday. So, and the reason we've done that, as you've indicated, is to enable me as general manager to be able to offload some of the sort of the mundane day-to-day activities or the administrative activities that typically I'm involved with, because it's just been me. So what we've been able to do is using, hopefully, we'll know obviously over the next couple of months, but we are hoping to be able to offload a lot of that stuff to enable me to manage, to work more on the relationship building within the association. So and you know, we can offload this stuff in a very cost-effective way.
And that's the key, is it's about looking at where you can add the most value in your business, your organization, as an advisor, and realizing you don't have to do everything. You don't have to be in control of every little credit card or direct debit change or updating somebody's address in the CRM. You don't have to do everything. And I think what we see a lot of is a lot of business owners and advisors that are actually doing the smallest of tasks, which the clients don't expect them to do, but many advisors kind of get stuck in that mindset of they've been doing it for so long, it's hard to hand it off. And I think, as you'll find, David, once you can, release 10, 15, 20 hours a week as you go forward, you're going to start to see just how much more fun you can have in business doing the bits you love, which is powerful.
I'm looking forward to I'm looking forward to being able to get rid of some of this stuff. It'd be good, actually. Right.
Awesome.
Next question. So when it comes to employing a VA, what do you see from an advisor's point of view? Because you've obviously got an insight from the perspective of an advisor, because you've been one. What do you think are the biggest risks when you're employing a VA, and how do you think advisors should manage those risks?
Good question. So with advisors, I guess there's probably three things that stood out to me around virtual assistants, especially from our type of virtual assistants. So we work based out of the Philippines. So our assistants are usually a third the cost of someone local once you add up all the ACC and all the other fun and exciting things. So with our assistants, we probably see the risks as as a lot of advisors don't understand the process. So when I say that, it's understanding how do you actually hire someone offshore to make sure they're going to be able to do what they want. Sometimes people just see the dollar signs of how much cheaper it is, and they try and do it themselves. They don't understand how to do it effectively, to train, to get someone on board. It goes wrong, and then they have a negative opinion of it. So it kind of goes down the idea of if you go too cheap, you usually end up with someone who's underqualified, and you also have a process that doesn't work. Probably the second risk of employing a VA as well is not being really, not being truly understanding that it does take time to bring one on. Day one of someone's work is never going to be perfect. Even though they are a contracted employee, in essence, they still need time to understand your systems, your processes, the way you think. Whether they're sitting right next to you or in another country, you've got to realize it does take anywhere from a month to 3 months to get them fully upskilled to a point where they're able to really grow your business or help you grow your business. They'll be efficient, but they'll take time to grow, if that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. But it's like any bringing on any employee, isn't it? They're when they start, they've got very little idea as to how the practice runs. So it's understanding that person will need to come up to speed over time.
Right, exactly. That's the biggest. Like, that would be the biggest risk I see, is people getting the wrong impression because they've not understood the process. And what we've seen is people trying to hire directly, and you can definitely do that as an advisor, but you're just got to be very aware of the loopholes. It's kind of like if I decided to do my own end of year tax return, I'd probably go to jail because I wouldn't know wouldn't know the loopholes that I'd be missing, or I wouldn't know what I should be doing.
Yeah.
I could probably get it through it.
I think that's one of the things that I like about your model, is that I've got somebody local that I can rely on to manage those complexities for me, so I don't have to do my own due diligence. I'm actually relying on somebody else to do that.
Definitely, and that's just it's that fine line of, if you can be paying a third of the cost and have someone local that's able to be keeping it on track with all the IP we've generated over the last 18 months. It's kind of a no-brainer from that point of view. Yeah,
exactly. Okay, so, and I know I've already alluded to the fact that we've got some members that are using virtual staff, and we're heading that way from an NZFAA point of view. Perhaps you could give us some insights into what sort of work the VAs are doing for the advisors that you have set them up for.
Yeah, definitely. So what we're seeing a lot of is things like CRM management. What we know as a CRM is only as good as the data that's in it. And what we find is that over the years, CRMs can be holding very inaccurate data, be it even recent data from current cases, etc. So having an assistant who can basically run the CRM, and with some of these CRMs these days, they can do so many things. It can be a very, it can be something that needs to be managed. We've got clients who use a full-time assistant pretty much to manage their CRM. We've got clients with 1,000 clients themselves that need updating, checking, managing, having their direct debits updated, having their addresses updated, having touch points with those clients through the CRM that just couldn't be done by the advisor themselves. They're so busy in the meetings. So we're seeing a lot of admin in regards to CRM management and all those little things. So, like, realistically, for an advisor, maybe 30% of the emails that come through are actually worth your time. The other 70% could be everything from spam to meetings to things that could be managed by an assistant. So we're finding a lot of admin work. The second thing as well is marketing. So we're doing a lot of social media work, helping people keep up to date on social media, website updating when you get a testimonial, you want to load up a blog post, etc. And also sending out weekly, fortnightly or monthly newsletters. These are just a few ideas, as well as a little bit of calling from time to time for arrears and similar things.
Yeah, that's some of the stuff that we're looking to outsource to the VA from NZFAA. Things like our website. I spend a lot of time updating the website and just managing the website. And I've managed to find somebody that's got WordPress experience, so I can pretty much get this person starting next week to actually start running with the website, so I can focus on, again, the more important tasks as general manager. So,
and that's the key, is if you can focus on being the general manager, not the assistant, you're gonna have a better whole thing, aren't you?
Yes, I'm going to look forward to that, I have to say. Are there any particular areas or activities where you think you wouldn't recommend that advisors use their VA for?
Definitely, and there's definitely a few things that we always suggest. Is like, I'm not a personal believer in using especially offshore assistants for cold calling. That's really key. We haven't had personally great results in it, and as I said, we only try and use assistants for anything that works. So what I call warm calling, so people that are calling your own database works, but it's just not quite as good for direct cold calling, to be honest. That's one. The second thing you've just got to be very aware of as well, and make a decision on your own, is using assistants to manage things like credit card updates. Bank accounts are less important these days because you can't do, any days, because you can't do anything with them. But more importantly, some advisors will hold off doing credit card based transactions with an assistant for the first 3 to 6 months until they're very confident that they're going to be around. I personally, we've never had an issue at all, and we're very stringent on the way we operate around that. But it is something just to be very aware of, to make sure that you're comfortable more than anything.
Yeah, and I think, some of those risks exist whether you've got an employee here or whether they've got an employee in the Philippines, I guess, because cloud-based technology enables us to pretty much, access data from wherever, doesn't it?
Yeah, exactly. And this is the thing, is that whether they're sitting in your office, if someone really wants to do something wrong, they're going to do it. That's the catch. And the reason we went with the Philippines is because, it's a very, very Catholic-based society. They're amazing people. They, the actual work ethic and loyalty that we've found from the staff is just second to none. So they really value their jobs. And Kiwis do as well, but sometimes it doesn't always come through. Whereas these guys are amazing.
Yeah. Well, to say, my experience so far has been quite positive. So,
Awesome.
What about challenges? What do you think are the biggest challenges to advisors who are looking to contract a virtual assistant?
I guess the biggest challenges again is it's coming to terms with the fact that there is an onboarding time period, and you've got to be willing to get through the initial period. Like we help a lot with training ourselves, but there is always a period of both training working with the assistant to understand the way you think, but also training yourself to be able to work with an assistant. It's not. It is a new thing for a lot of people, starting to hand things off. And we had a meeting with an advisor the other day who could see that same problem, is that they knew they shouldn't be doing some things, but they found themselves up at spending half an hour updating 3 things for a client one afternoon, and they counted it as half an hour. And they realized, why am I doing this? It's just, there's no benefit. The client's not going, wow, I can't wait till my advisor updates this. There was just no value in it. So that was definitely one big challenge. The second challenge is basically with an assistant, the concept of getting someone on for 40 hours a week, if they're getting a full-time person. It can be daunting, because what naturally goes through people's minds is how can I fill 40 hours? That's the biggest fear factor. And what I say to people is, with our price points, if this assistant can help you sign just one more client on an average commission scale, you'll be making more money from that than it'll cost you to have your assistant. If you just make one more closed insurance policy of an average size.
And often it's only a portion of that, isn't it? So
we went to one group actually told us the cost of our assistants was about 40 to 50% their average commission payout. And so just from signing one more client, they would double their money on having an assistant, even if the assistant did 10 hours a week and just did charity work for 30 hours a week as well. They would still be more effective than they were. And they knew they would, over time, be able to outsource more and more and more.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the challenges I'm going to face next week, is actually being willing to let go of some of the stuff that I've traditionally been doing over the last 2 or 3 years. So,
it's also about being aware that that there will be mistakes. There's no question. Humans are human. There will be points where you get frustrated. There will be points where you will irrationally blame everyone else by yourself. It's just going to happen. And we all do it. And but once you get through that point, and once you realize, hey, the little bit of extra time it takes to train someone on doing it means I never have to do it again. It's a great feeling.
Yeah, it's all about investing time, isn't it? Okay, next question. What, if you're going to engage a VA, what sort of technologies are you recommending advisors should be using in their practice for managing a VA?
Probably the biggest ones that we use, and I'll just touch on 2 to start with, and an overview. So overview would be anything in the cloud is really beneficial. The majority of CRMs are moving to the cloud if they haven't already, and tools like Sweetbox make it a lot easier as well for VAs to interact. So that's beneficial. We use a tool called Jing, Jing. So if you Google that, what it allows you to do is take short screen capture videos of processes that you're using in your business. So you're able to do what you're doing already, and you're able to talk over the video that you're creating. And so basically doing something that takes no more time than doing the work yourself, you're able to actually start recording some training videos of your processes. That's been ideal for business owners to get across information to assistants that aren't local, because the assistant's able to watch that video multiple times through a very easy link that they're able to watch. And we teach all of our clients how to use that to make it efficient. The second tool, and I know we're just a bit tight for time, so I'll just go through this quite quickly, is a tool called Voxer, Voxer, similar to WhatsApp and similar to other similar apps. But what it allows you to do is send photos, text messages, and short audio clips very easily through to your assistant, so that anytime they're working, you're able to actually be in touch with them like they're sitting right next to you at a desk or in the car or anywhere you are. So if you walk out of a meeting you can send a short message, and it can be actioned before you're even back at the office. Be it notes for the CRM, etc. So it allows you to literally have the best of both worlds.
Right, yeah. As one of the you touched on an interesting point actually, and that's the need to have some relatively well-defined processes within your practice to make best advantage of a virtual assistant. So if your processes are not well defined, then it potentially becomes quite problematic trying to then engage. I guess it's the same with any employee, isn't it, really?
Definitely. And you've got to, we've actually had clients come back to us after 3 months and said, hey, our assistant's been very inefficient, but we know why, because we haven't done anything with we haven't trained them properly, and but what they've realized over that 3-month period is they've built training manuals of 60 videos plus very easily, short 5-minute videos. And they've realized that, hey, look what we can achieve. Look what we've actually started to build process, which they never had, which adds value to their business in the longer run as well.
Oh, that's an interesting insight, actually. I hadn't thought of that. Yeah, it's a good point. Okay, again, very conscious of time, so I'm going to quickly wrap through some of these questions. Let's just do this last one. What controls, processes, and mechanisms do you would recommend advisors have in place for engaging a VA?
As mentioned, I definitely think working with an agency or whoever it is, whether it's us or someone else, it's working with an agency that understands how to set things up correctly. Having VAs actually in offices keeps it a lot safer than running from home, and we've learnt that over time. It's just about efficiency more than anything. So we're always learning as well, so we're very agile. And probably not touching on what Barry will also talk about, is just making sure that if you are looking at engaging a VA, something we've recently looked at is actually putting something in your statement of advice. I think that's what it's called off the top of my head at the moment, but it's something when you engage a client that they actually know that you have an assistant externally. And this is whether you have someone virtually in New Zealand or offshore. It's the same little bit of text, just allowing people to know that the files are stored in the cloud. The files are accessed by your assistant, which is not based in the same office. And we can provide a little snippet for you if you'd like for that as well, just to make sure it's in there.
Yeah, that would potentially be quite useful, actually. Okay, Stephen, thank you very much for your participation this morning. I'm really looking forward to working with Jackie starting next week. And I'll keep you posted. Now, again, if you are interested in virtual staff, if any of the audience are interested in virtual staff, the email follow-up will include a link to Stephen's virtual staff website. And if you need to contact Stephen at all, his contact details are on that website. Stephen, once again, thank you so much for your time.
No problems.
Again, if I could just keep you online, because there may be some questions at the end. I will hand over to Barry.
Definitely.
Barry, good morning.
Good morning, David. How are you?
Very good. You still awake?
Yes, very much so. No, it's all good stuff.
Interesting. It is interesting stuff, isn't it? It's an area and I've been in technology for some time, and this stuff just rivets me. Hopefully, the audience are suitably interested as well. Thanks again, Barry, for again participating on our Compliance Matters program. You're going to bring, I'm sure, some very useful insights into the virtual practice, looking at some of the best practice models, some of the things that advisors need to be thinking about if they go down this route, and potentially some of the opportunities that they could use to take advantage of the evolving technology which is enabling this change to our industry. So I'm going to give you panelist presenter rights.
Cool.
And I will hand over to you. So you've got probably about 20-25 minutes, Barry, before we need to wrap up.
Fantastic. Thanks, David. Look, as I just said, we do a lot of work with clients on advice process development and looking for ways not only to be compliant, but to be efficient as well. So yeah, this is definitely exciting stuff. I mean, we look at financial advice or financial services. We've been operating the same way for a long time, with paper-based, where we've seen other financial services businesses where you can do all your banking and accounting online now. Why can't we do financial advice potentially online as well? So what I want to do in this session, I guess, is just wrap up, I guess, key points that advisors should look at. And some of these actually, while I'm talking about them as far as virtual advice or online meetings are concerned, some of them cross over just with normal practices as well. I was glad to hear both the guys talk about saying, hey, you have to have a process in place before you can take it virtual. And that, I guess, one of the things we always look at. Get it right analog first before you start looking for systems. Compliance considerations and around the virtual advice practice, and specifically at the two opportunities that have been presented today. Why is this important? Obviously, this is important because all businesses now run off IT systems. You'll remember, for those of you who were on our last session, I think we worked out there was on average 17 either computer systems or pieces of technology a business can run on. And you've got obligations to get it right, not only to your clients, but also to the regulators and the lawmakers. Relevant regulations that cross over the things we've been discussing today. Privacy Act's a big one. Financial Advisors Act, you've got obligations around data, client information, suitability advice process. Fair Trading and Companies Act come into these as well. AML CFT, what we've touched on, I was really pleased to hear discuss that, because that is a relevant point. And obviously, if we're going to use electronic signature forms, just understanding when they are suitable or not. And I think Ian summed that up really well. So why do we have to get it right? Because basically, if you get it wrong, it could be business ending. So let's look specifically at the two areas that have been covered off today. Virtual or outsourced assistants. Whenever I hear the word virtual, I get visions of robots. We call them outsourced. And as I just said before, a lot of the things with taking on any assistant, be it a virtual assistant or a real assistant, is, well, okay, here are the questions that we would be asking if people were looking to develop this as part of their practice. Firstly, what tasks will they be doing? In some cases, we see advisors take on staff or take on technologies, almost looking for that technology or that staff member to give them the answer or improvement in their process without actually having defined what the process is. So that's a really important part, because it's no use just getting a virtual assistant and say, cool, help me out. You need to know, pardon me, what they'll actually be doing. Another one is, what systems will they have access to? And as Stephen mentioned, the CRM system's obviously an obvious one. And the good thing is that most systems have different levels of access. But then also there are product provider systems that a lot of people use. So will they have access to those? One is, how will you monitor performance? And this comes back to setting tasks and service levels. If you're going to have them do things, how are you going to know they're actually doing them and doing them correctly? So you're going to need a process around that, or control. What training is required? Who will do the training? And who does the recruiting? And I think Stephen's covered off that really well with their service about how they've learned as they've gone through the process with advisors, and are able to give assistance in that space. But those are normal questions that we would ask when taking on any staff member to an advice practice. So what should you do before engaging a virtual assistant services? As Stephen said, first thing, and we mentioned this last time, you need to map out your processes and know what each task is and who's doing each task. Once you know that, you'll start to get an idea of which tasks in your process are the repetitive, administrative, potentially low-risk tasks. You'll then work out, well, what are the inputs and outputs? If you do that and you decide, well, here are the particular tasks in my process, these are the inputs and outputs, which then tell me, well, do they need email? Do they need the CRM system? Do they need other access to systems to be able to do those tasks? And you can start to divide them up. So, for example, in an advice process, if you get a lead, you might get the virtual assistants to arrange the appointment and send the email and set the calendar, prepare, make sure the documents or a client file is set up in a CRM system. Then the advisor takes over from there and gets into the advice process, might go all the way through to the underwriting process, but then at the end of that, there's a welcome aboard process that could be taken over by a virtual assistant or somebody else. So those are the type of decisions that you would need to make, I think, prior to going on and finding somebody to take over.
I was interested to hear Stephen's comment about the advisor that didn't get much out of the VA for the first 3 months because they were actually building the processes as they were engaging the VA. So it does raise an interesting point.
Oh, look, I've seen it many times in the past. There was a back office service that was run a few years ago, and advisors would join it, and then they'd start complaining about exactly that. Hey, they're not doing what I want them to do. And then you go, have you told them what you want to do? A, did they agree? Was that part of the service? So expectations are really, really important about what is it they're doing. In my opinion, an administrative assistant, it's a bit different from potentially having a financial advice assistant who actually you're asking to think about and make decisions on tasks or make decisions when issues crop up versus somebody who is strictly administrating parts, which is why when you say which tasks do you allocate, it's probably the ones that are the administrative, repetitive type tasks. And Stephen said it, renewal updates, social media updates, potentially taking email and phone call messages and filtering those for you. In fact, my office here have divided up my email box and have taken over control for that, having missed a couple of important emails. So I have a smaller email box that I have to look at, and if I don't, I get whipped, beaten, and harassed. So,
which I'm sure you enjoy.
No, not at all. No, well, maybe a little bit. Okay. Now, the other one is, we're talking about marketing campaigns and newsletters. Now, those are just examples, but there could be parts of advice processes where there are automatic things that you would like to happen to make a workflow work, which you could involve a virtual assistant or an administrative assistant in. But I guess, as a rule of thumb, think back office or non-client facing potentially tasks first, rather than advice tasks is probably the way I would look at it, or the way I would suggest approaching it. Higher risk tasks, I guess, for outsourcing, access to provider systems, and probably particularly the investment platforms and systems or trading systems, where there's access to monies, that is always a danger, especially depending on where the VA is. If they are overseas, because that brings into a whole lot of risk around anti-money laundering bits and pieces. So you want to watch out for that. Client contact, you'd need to consider that as well, what type of client contact. And also things like underwriting tasks for your insurance guys. So anywhere where there is client decisions or sensitive information or potentially trading information, you'd want to watch out for those or think carefully before doing that. It may be something that over time, where you build up, a relationship, and trust, and people prove themselves, that you could move into that area. But yeah, I think those are the ones you'd be watching out for. So how do you engage? And Stephen covered off this really cool. There's a bit of a checklist there, just, I guess, to look at. So recruitment, background and security checks, especially for Category 1 advisors, investment products. You do need to have background and security checks on anybody you do recruit that's involved or has access to client information. Who's going to do the training and how's that going to work? I'd expect to have written processes. I really do love the idea of having the video training on processes as well. It doesn't have to be necessarily written down. Video processing, great way to do it. With systems access, you could potentially divide systems access in most CRM systems to particular tasks or particular areas. And in fact, in most systems these days too, there are audit trails on where you can actually look at access reporting or task reporting to see who's using what and when they're doing it. You'd want to put in controls for reviewing work to make sure that it's been done, but that should be done anyway. The next thing is, as Steve said, was disclosure to clients. You're going to need to disclose if information is being held offshore or if you're working with somebody who is outside of your office and outside of the country. And then contracts and agreements. When looking at contracts and agreements, think about how it's going to end. That's not just with this type of work, that's with any contract. You know, how are you going to back out of using the service as well? Because things change. And then also just check your PI cover as well. Make sure there's no horrible, silly clauses in there about using overseas or online resources as well.
That last one's quite an interesting one, actually. We need to check with Derek about how the NZFAA scheme works.
It's a good question to ask, and it was just one that I thought of as I was going through putting this together. It was one I'd recommend checking. And that's more from the point of view, it's almost your public liability, you know, with the loss of information. So if it says, hey, you're protected if you accidentally release private information, but if it's got exclusions, the systems or overseas access, then that could be a problem.
Yeah, I understand. Yeah, I'll have a conversation with Derek.
Cool. Online meetings. This is an area that, in fact, I had a meeting with David using Sweetbox the other day. I thought it's a fantastic system, and I can definitely see application on this for parts of the advice process for advisors to use. You know, some real obvious ones is obviously clients where you've got existing clients who've moved away from the area, who've already engaged with and have a relationship, but also, you know, client renewals or transactional style business as well, where, you know, you're potentially doing group schemes where you want to talk to people who are around the country. So yeah, I can definitely see a lot of application for this type of service. Things to consider, you know, what types of advice or process would you use? So where you are in a high relationship style advice business, where there's a lot of planning, coaching, and a good relationship involved, you may want to think about when you would deploy a tool like this. The other question is, what will customers think? You know, is that something they're comfortable doing? So you may have to pick and choose when you use it. We already have advice businesses who ask clients, you know, how do you want to communicate with us? And this could just be added to the list as an option and then build up from there. How good is the client's internet? So think about that as well. There are parts of New Zealand that aren't on, you know, really flash internet connections, so that's a consideration. Security, and I'm sure Sweetbox will be able to cover that off in their details of how secure the video links are, where the data is stored, so where the videos are recorded and stored on their systems. Then you'd want to know, cool, who has access to those? And once again, think about if you then left the service later on because you've sold to a business that doesn't want to use it or whatever, to go and live in Fiji permanently now because this video online was so successful, you know, can you get those videos off? What are the things about that? So whenever you enter into using any system, be it a CRM system or an online system, the question is, you know, how would we get out of this if this relationship ends? Key risks. One of them's more of a, first one's not right a compliance one, it's more of a business one, customer expectations and relationship. So I see this being an enhancement, but in some cases it may not be. So I definitely wouldn't want to make it a hard and fast rule about using it. I'd suggest that you want it horses for courses. Data security, it's your number one risk. And I think you definitely want to make sure everything's covered off. Ending the contract I've already talked about. And the other one is, I guess, is business process development. Once again, it's no use grabbing a tool and just starting to use it without thinking about how it integrates with everything else. Our biggest risks: data security. Your business holds a lot of personal information, as we discussed in our last presentation. We've got bank accounts, we've got credit card details, we've got personal health information. So it's a real big one to make sure you do follow reasonable process to ensure that is secure.
Yeah, for the audience, the data security topic is our next webinar, I think, which is up in June. Yeah, so if you want to know more about that, please register when we send out the invite.
Yeah, look, and I've got a couple of people I've been speaking to, because it's funny how we started talking about this at the start of the year, and I just noticed more and more articles and presentations and things coming online with this. So,
yeah, there's some fascinating insights from overseas as to what the risks are, particularly in the financial services sector, and advisors are very much in the firing line there.
Yeah. Oh, one thing I sort of didn't cover off around the online meetings. I was really pleased that you covered off the electronic signatures, and yeah, I definitely concur. We're lucky we've got it covered off. There are some exceptions around it, and as you said, it's actually more when a product provider, if an insurer says, "Oh no, we can't accept an electronic signature," that's not because legally they can't. It's because they've decided not to. Their legal people, compliance people have decided that they just don't want the fight if it is questioned. Yeah. But as far as you accepting electronic signatures on your advice documentation, on your client acknowledgements of scope of service, on acceptance of your statements of advice, there is no issue, especially if you're using a tool like Sweetbox or some other tool that gives a very good data capture of that happening.
Yeah, I've just recently, with another hat on, built an ACC authority through Adobe Professional, which has got electronic signature on it for a client of mine. And we went to ACC and I said, "Oh yeah, no problem at all." So I think more and more organisations are acknowledging that is the way of the future.
Yeah, the interesting one, and we did touch on it, which was the AML CFT one. And I agree. My personal opinion is, if you're on video with someone and they hold up their driver's license, or you snap a shot of it and it looks like them, it is them, and it's the same date, I'd almost be comfortable to say that, we should be accepting that. And once again, the product providers have their own rules around what they accept around this, remembering that any requirements around ID, verification, certification, and originals is actually their regulated guidelines. They're not the law. So once again, it's the product providers that are setting these boundaries of what's acceptable and what's not, rather than the law itself. But once again, we're starting to see. I've got one client at the moment that's got a nice little system. I think it costs $2 per client to use, which is you send them a link for checking their ID, and it pops up on their video camera, and they show they hold their driver's license up to it, and it takes a snapshot of that, and then you hold your face up to it and it takes a snapshot of that, and then you answer a couple of questions, and it races off to Vida, whoever it is, and checks the address, and then comes back and goes, "Yep, that's you," and the facial match was right.
Interesting.
I would hope my face doesn't match my photo on my Olo driver's license, but there you go.
Yeah, I agree.
Rightio, privacy statements. Yeah, this is a question for everybody anyway. Do you get authority to hold client data? I know some advisors have assumed in the past, because there's a privacy statement on either policy applications or provider declarations, especially around Class Advice KiwiSaver. I see a lot of the guys not using their own privacy statement. They're relying on the product provider's policy statement, but the product provider policy statement doesn't give you authority to hold it in your office. So double check that, guys. But yeah, disclose where and how is it stored, and do you have authority to share that client data, such as with a virtual assistant. So you'd want that covered off.
Yeah, absolutely.
As we said, we all want to be sitting on a beach in Fiji working. So technology should be creating efficiencies, replace those repetitive tasks, ideally reduce cost, and while it might not reduce risk of data security in compared to locking them away in a bank vault in your office, we should look at ways of making sure we reduce the risk of data security using technology. So yeah, that's all from me, unless there's any questions, David.
Brilliant, Barry, and very useful insights there. That was particularly the area around making sure that you've got client authority to hold their data. And given particularly the sensitivity of that data, I think that's really, really important. There's a whole lot of stuff there that we need to get our heads around. There was one question quickly: under what legislation are electronic signatures legal in New Zealand? I think it's the Electronic Signatures Act. Is that right? Or Electronic Transactions Act. Is that right?
There you go. New Zealand Electronics Transactions Act, 2002 Act. I don't know why I've got the other act in there, because it is.
Because it's an act.
It specifically states, it clearly states what represents, and I think Ian summed it up really well. You know, as long as both parties go, yep, I signed that on that day on that electronic system, it's acceptable. There's also a list in the Act of when it is challenged, what would make it challengeable under law. But as Ian said, they were using Sweetbox and they signed it, and there's video of them online signing the form. They're stuffed. So think the same way. If you've had a meeting with someone and they've signed on your iPad and it dates and times it, and you've got a record of the meeting and you email them a copy of it after the meeting, and they accept that email with a copy of it in the same way you would with sending them a prop or an application form for an investment, and they go, yep, thanks very much. For them to then turn around and challenge it later on would be very, very difficult.
Yeah, it's all about intent, isn't it? And evidencing intent. And there's a raft of different ways of doing that. So
the process is designed to go, yep, we had the meeting on that day. I was in your office. The form says it was signed on that day at that time when I was with you. The chances of it not being your signature diminish significantly.
Yes, and the interesting thing is, as well, from a digital point of view, your signature doesn't need to look like your signature.
No. So
in fact,
have to be it's not a digital match. It's actually, so you can stick to the old X, and as long as it's dated and timed and your name's below it, then yeah.
Yeah, exactly. Okay, I'm conscious.
They didn't use it in writing, otherwise things would be a lot easier. Yeah.
Exactly. Barry, thank you very much for, again, very valuable insights. I hope the audience online have benefited from the insights we've got from both yourself, as well as from Stephen and Ian. I will, as I say, send out some links to the websites for Virtual Staff and Sweetbox, and I'd urge you to check out both if you ever thought about going through the VA virtual assistant route. Virtual Staff is probably, I think it's one of the only providers in New Zealand, but the process so far for me has been very positive. And similarly for Sweetbox, very, very good technologies.
Well, the good thing with Virtual Staff is they have specialised in dealing with advisors before, so that makes it a good head start when dealing with virtual assistants.
Exactly. Yes, that's right. So to our panelists, thank you again very much for your time this morning. It's been very valuable for us and the audience. I will be putting a recording up of this session early next week. And if you do want to take advantage of the CPD opportunity, please make sure you complete the follow-up survey. You should get that as soon as this message is finished. And if you want any more information about what we talked about today, feel free to get in touch via email or pick up the phone. In the meantime, we were supposed to put a 1st of April thing in here, weren't we, Barry? Was there anything in there? No, it wasn't.
I completely forgot.
Oh, Barry. Anyway, all that material was real, even though it wasn't 1st of April. So hopefully nobody's been spoofed this morning. Have a very nice weekend, everybody, and hopefully we'll see you online at our next session, which I think is the first Friday in June. Enjoy your weekend. Thanks very much.